Hi everyone, thanks for watching this tutorial. We will learn how to name ionic compounds in this tutorial. Now, naming ionic compounds is one of the easiest tasks for naming in chemistry, because compared to naming in organic compounds, there are more terms, more systems that you have to learn. But ionic compounds is very simple. But before we get into the detail of naming ionic compounds, let's look at the meaning of an ion. So I'm going to write this. Okay, so if you have learned all those ions, this is a fluoride ion. Okay, it is an ion of fluorine, and there's a charge, and this charge annotates that it is an ion. Now, the reason why it has a minus charge is because for the original fluorine atom, which only has 9 electrons, it gains 1 more electron. And when it gains 1 more electron, there are more electrons. There's 1 more electron than the number of protons. So for this fluoride ion, there are a total of 10 electrons and 9 protons. So this is the whole reason why there's a minus in there. And if you look at the periodic table, you can see that all the group 17 elements, all the halogens, they all have a minus charge when they form ions. So this is how we say ions. And so how does it help us to name the compounds? So when we say compound, compounds are neutral, okay? Like sodium chloride is neutral. Okay, we all know about sodium chloride because we use it almost every single day when we eat, when we talk about sodium, how salty something is. So let's start from sodium chloride as an example. Okay, so sodium chloride. And the chemical formula for sodium chloride, I bet many of you have should know this already. NaCl. Okay, you may have learned this in your previous science courses. So NaCl is the chemical formula for sodium chloride. Now, let's break it down. Why is it NaCl? Why is it not like Na2Cl3 or some other variations? So let's break it down. So when we say sodium chloride, what it means is that we have sodium, ions, ion, and chloride ion. Okay? Now, let's write them out here. Sodium ion and chloride ion. Now, the combination between ion is that when they come together, they will form a compound, and the compound must be neutral. Okay, if there is a kind of compound between those two ions. Okay, so the charge must be neutral for the overall compound. So when you look at these two ions, one has a positive charge, and the other one has a negative charge. And when they come together, they would cancel the charges. So what they need is one of this and one of that, and they would become a neutral compound, NaCl. So this is the reason why we use one sodium and one chloride ion to name sodium chloride, to write the chemical formula for sodium chloride. Now let me give you another example. The other example, let's say calcium chloride. Okay, calcium chloride. So let's list out the ions. So let's list out the calcium ion and the chloride ion and see what happened. Okay, so when we see these ions, we will ask ourselves a question. Our question is, well, how many of each do we need to make a compound that will be neutral in charge? So let's think about this. If we have one of each, would that give us a neutral compound? This is a 2+ charge. This has a negative charge. If we just need one of each to come together, then we will have a net charge of positive at the very end. So it would not be a compound, it would still be an ion. So in this sense, we will have to need two chloride ions to combine with calcium ion in order to make a neutral compound. And therefore, the overall equation, the overall chemical formula for calcium chloride would be CaCl2. Okay, so this is the very basic part of naming ionic compound. Now, after these two examples, let's look at the name. How do we give the name of the ionic compounds? We simply put the ions together without the word ions. Okay, so calcium chloride, calcium ion, and chloride ion. We just literally put them together. So I hope that you feel this is very simple. And now let's move on to a little bit more advanced stage where some people always get confused. They don't know why it's being named this way. So what I'm talking here is something like when I give you this chemical formula, and I would like you to give me a name, the chemical name for this compound, what would you write down? Now, for many beginner students, they would write this. Okay, and for many students, they would write this. But the problem, well, it is not correct. It is not correct. I can tell you right now. But what is the mistake? What is the mistake for this name? Well, you will think that, okay, this is copper, so this is copper ion, and this is chloride ion. So we put them together. You just told me that you just put those two ions names together. Well, that's true. But what we have to be aware of is that, well, for some ions like copper, there may be one other variations possible. Okay, so if you look at the right hand side here, I list out some of the ions, and if you look at these two, copper plus Cu plus and copper 2 plus Cu2 plus. So what we have here is called a copper 1 ion, and this is a copper 2 ion. So if you just say copper chloride, people would really have no clue which one you're talking about. So in that case, we have to figure out which one are we talking here. So is this copper 1 or copper 2? So we have to use some logic to figure this out, and it's not that difficult. So think about this. Copper ion, we don't know what the charge is for now. We just don't know it yet. But for chloride ion, we know. We know what chloride ion is. It's Cl minus. And with the chemical formula right here, it says there are two of them. So let's put two of them here. And what's the main rule of making a compound? The definition of a compound is that, well, it's a combination of atoms, okay? And the overall charge must be neutral. So the charge must be neutral, and this is the biggest hint. So look at the right-hand side, look at the negative charges. We have two chloride ions, and we have a total of 2 minus charge. And therefore, on the left-hand side, we should have copper 2 plus. So that the charge will be balanced in this sense. Okay? And since we know now that it is a copper 2 plus ion, so it will be copper 2 chloride. Okay? So let me give you another example. Another example would be Cu2O. Okay? So what would this compound be? So you may want to pause this for a second and try to figure out what is the name of this compound. Okay? Now, look at this here. It will be something copper, a blank oxide. Okay, so let's figure this out. Oxygen has a 2 minus, oxide ion has a 2 minus charge, and copper, in this case, we have 2 of them. Okay, so we need to figure out the charge. So on the right hand side we have 2 minus charge. On the left hand side we have 2 copper ions. And they all have to come up with the same amount of positive charge to balance out the negative charge. So what would that be? Well, you think about this. The copper must have a positive charge so that they can balance out each other. So in this case, this will be the copper 1 oxide. Okay? Now, I hope you feel that's very simple for now. Now let's go one more step, one more stage, okay, above. So let me give you a compound. Okay, NH4Cl. Now one of the I would say, when we learn about naming ionic compounds, we would say if you look at the compound and if you see something that is metal and a combination of metals and non-metals, that it will be an ionic compound. In this case, we see all non-metals, okay, nitrogen, hydrogen, and chlorine. So we would think we may be misguided to think that it is a covalent compound. It is not the case. Okay, if you have your ions memorized, and if you look at this compound, you should have a feeling that, oh, this looks like a group, okay, because it's NH4, and this is like by itself, and it does. And this is actually a combination of 2 ions. Okay, it's an ammonium ion and a chloride ion. And when we put these 2 ions together, we form a compound called ammonium chloride. Okay, so this is how we can recognize the nature of the compound, is by really knowing the ions. When we really know the ions, we can tell that something is covalent or ionic. And so hopefully you have all the ions recognized. Maybe it depends on your teacher. Your teacher may give you a chart, but if you have to memorize the ions, so please make sure that you have all the ions firmly memorized so that you can make use of those ions very readily. Okay, and this is all for here, naming ionic compounds. And there'll be some practice on my website, so you can look at the websites and get some practices.